Hi, thank you for joining my session. My name is Steve Welch. I am part of the customer success department here at Netreo, customer operations engineer. I've been here for a little over 5.5 years. And today our session is going to be about device onboarding with device attributes and automation. So hopefully we can use this session to make your life easier and automagically being able to configure devices and put them, the correct service checks, templating, thresholding, contacts, all that kind of information done as much as an automated process as possible to make your onboarding devices and your device management stress-free and easy to do. Even though this session is pre-recorded, please know that I am in here in the chat during this presentation. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out and ask away, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you guys might have. So before we get started, there's a couple things that I want to level set on. And I'm going to be going both against from the UI perspective of Netreo, as well as a MIB browser to get oriented with SNMP, OIDs, and MIB files. So first, I'll cover our MIB file, or a MIB browser here. So moving on over to our browser view as well here. So I'm going to grab the OID here. I'm going to take a look at our device here, India S1. It's a Cisco iOS switch. This is the type of device I'm going to be putting my device attributes on. But let's just go ahead and test to make sure this is even a valid OID to query against. So click on the gear icon, went to device administration pages. From here, click on debugging tools and then test SNMP. And then from here, I'm going to choose custom OID. Now you see this option here for get and walk. A rule of thumb is that if it ends with a .0, it's going to be a get. That's a singular response back, like overall CPU utilization or memory utilization, so then we can get a single value back. If it's anything other than a .0, like in this example here, a .1, is typically going to be a table response or what we call a walk, and this is give us multiple values back. So you can see with this, testing the stack port status, I have two stack ports represented by these two index numbers here, but they're both coming back with the result of 2. And if we look at our MIB browser here, we can see that there's 3 options that can come back as. Value of 1 means up, value of 2 means down, and value of 3 means force down. So in this example here, this device has 2 stack port links, and they're both down. Now in my lab, I actually don't have any switch stack members or configurations. So all my switches are going to respond with down because I don't have any active switch stacks in my environment. But that's okay. We'll work around this for this example here. But this shows me that this is a valid OID. The devices are responding to it. It's something that I can use. For our example today for this session, I'm going to be using a dynamic device attribute to determine whether a switch is part of a stack switch configuration or not. And then by determining that, we can configure it with the proper service checks and thresholdings and templating involved with my switch stack members. So with the dynamic device attribute today, we'll be able to determine that and apply the configurations accordingly automatically. Now that we've talked about our OID or SNP query that we're going to use for our device attribute, let me jump over to just a browser view here. And I'm going to show you device subtype that I've created. If we go to administration, change devices, edit device type subtypes. From here, I'm going to select device subtypes. From our device subtypes view here, I am going to search for switch. I'm going to search for stack here. I already created one. I'm not going to go process the created one. We have documentation for that. It's pretty straightforward. But if I click edit on this, from the device subtype administration view, we can see what device type this is related to. So we see Cisco iOS switch, which is the device in question, device type in question, which we're going to be working with. But other Cisco switch devices here. I don't have any singleton or table pollers on here. I'm not getting any kind of performance metrics from this subtype. But if I did want to, if there was any available SNMP based trendable data that can query, we can go ahead and create those pollers here. So that way they'll only be pulled from a device with this particular subtype rather than trying to pull it from, say, every single Cisco switch. You can see we have no devices associated currently, but that'll change as we go along here. Another area I want to cover is device templates. So if I go to administration and then templates, again, I'm not going to go over creating templates. We have documentation for that you can go to kb.netreo.com. But I'm going to go ahead and search for switch. And we see I have a switch stacks template. It's been created. It's not associated with anything yet, but let's go ahead and click edit on this. And we can see within our switch stacks template, we have very specific service checks. We have a check Cisco stack switch status and also check interface status by name or description. I'm using stack port or uplink because these would be common links to monitor for in a stack switch configuration. But this template is not applied to anything yet. If I scroll down, you can see there's type, subtype, site. There's nothing that's tied to this template yet. We're going to associate this template to the subtype. If I go back over to my device template administration page, this configure template usage, I'm going to choose type subtype. And if you're a keen observer out there, you may notice this is exactly the same place we were just a minute ago. And it's just taking me as a shortcut right back to that same spot. I'm going to click view subtypes. I'm going to look for our stack again. I'm going to click edit. And from this view here, where it says template, I'm just going to make sure that we use our switch stacks template. I'm going to update that. So we have our OID that we're going to use. We have our subtype or the organization method that we're going to use to apply to the devices when they get onboarded. We have our template created and tied to that organization method, so subtypes. And within that template, we have our service checks that are geared towards stack switches. Now that we have our template associated, let's go ahead and create our dynamic device attribute now. So for this, as I mentioned, we're applying this to our Cisco iOS switches. I'm going to go back here. I'm going to look for my iOS devices. Cisco iOS switch. I'm going to edit this one. And this is the device type, so it's very similar in the UI as far as looking at the device subtype administration page. In this case here, we got some extra fields in here, such as string to match. So this is part of the automation process when you onboard a device. As we automatically learn devices and we're querying their system description, we can use string to match based off the system description to tie it to a particular device type. So you can see the Cisco iOS switch is going to match any of these Cisco models essentially here as we go down the list. And you can see we got some singleton pollers, we got some table pollers here, our basic metrics that we get off our devices. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a dynamic device attribute poller. If I click the little plus symbol right here, I'm going to call this stack port underscore status, stack port status. Now, if you recall, we're getting our OID from over here. So the port status here, the stack port status, I'm going to copy that and put that here in target OID. As you recall, when we tested this, it brought up 2 responses. What this will do is it'll bring up it'll record the first response. So the first index is what we're recording. That's okay. They're both down. Typically in the configuration, if it's a stack member, you're going to have the first one connected. This will give us our results here. And click create. All right, now that we have our subtype created and it's associated to Cisco iOS switches, we have our Cisco iOS switch device type here configured with a dynamic device attribute for stack port status. We're using the OID. We have our device template tied to our device subtype. Let's go over to our device auto configuration parameters. So administration, change devices, auto configuration parameters. You can think of it as kind of like an ACL list in the fact that it goes in order from top down. So order does matter when you're creating your rule sets here. Depending on the type of attribute you're configuring, you're going to want to make sure that it's in the proper order. So for example, A device can only belong to one category at a time. So if you have a rule set in here that says put any Windows server into the Windows server category, that's a very generic rule. You want that higher in the list. And as you go down, maybe you have a Windows server, but it's more specifically, it's a database server or a web server, and that has its own category. You'd want that to be further down the list, so that way it gets the more specific rule sets at the bottom. So let's go ahead and create our rule. I'm going to click on Add an Auto Configuration Rule. So the attribute we're going for here is device attribute. Now the name was stack port status. And if you recall, there was a set of responses here. So we could see 1 equals up, 2 equals down, and 3 equals force down. In a normal configuration here, we would want to trigger this off of the value of 1, meaning up means it's connected as part of a stack switch configuration. As I mentioned, I don't have one in my lab environment, so I'm going to reverse this. I'm going to use 2 as my trigger here, but in normal operation, you use 1, and that would mean that it'll trigger that there is a connected stack member, add the associated device property, and continue on. So I'm just going to reverse it in that regards, but otherwise the logic is the same. I'm going to put a 2 right here. I'm going to select device subtype, so if it matches this, if my stack port status equals 2, it's going to apply the switch stack device subtype. And then next to your rule condition, you can continue to process the next auto configuration rule or stop it right here and don't continue further. I would say 99.99% of the times, you're going to want to continue to the next auto configuration rule. I'm going to go ahead and save that. Now let's go ahead and add our device. We go to administration, change device, add device, and then manual. You can see I had this quick add here. So I'm going to go ahead and type in my device IP. I know what the IP address of my switch I'm going to add. So 10.200.36.254. Now what this does when I do a manual quick add is it's throwing our device IP, it's just throwing it into our interrogation table. And from there, it's going to go through the auto add process, auto discovery process. It's going to check to see if we have a valid credential in our device templates, if we can query the system description, we can get metrics. If we can, and it's not already a managed device, let's go ahead and add it to Netreo. This is the same process that goes through when we do subnet scanning, or we discover devices via STP traps, syslogs, or NetFlow. It's the kind of auto onboarding process here. I'm going to go ahead and add device. And kind of show you how that works here. I'm going to go from here and go to administration and then device management. And we can see we got 1 new device in here. Now this runs every 5 minutes, so I might have caught it just right at the right time, or maybe not the right time, I have to wait 5 minutes here, but the Netreo will go through the devices here in the new category that's newly added every 5 minutes, and then, as I mentioned, go through our credentials stored in the templates and see if they work on the device, and then add if it's not already a managed device. So I'm going to go ahead and pause it for right now and let this go through the process, and we'll continue in just a moment. Welcome back. Now we can see that in our new tab here, there's no devices in here. So let's go ahead and see what was added. And we can see that my device here, the 10.200.36.254, my Dallas S2 switch has been added. Now, if it didn't show up here and it was out of new, we can check in failed or filtered or duplicate to see if there's any reason why it wasn't added. Maybe the device already existed, maybe the IP already existed, or if it failed because it failed credentials. And you can always take that IP address and look it up in the system audit log and see more information as to why it was not added. So in this case here, I'm going to go ahead and click on Dallas S2. Now first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to click on host information, drop it down. You can see our serial number, description, hardware module, software version, all that's tied up in there. But here is our dynamic device attribute. So we stack port status equals 2. So we went ahead and recorded that automatically. And if I go to my services tab, now everything here is going to show pending because this device was just added. So it's going to take our availability engine just a moment here to get itself configured and add these service checks and start checking these devices. But we can see that among the service checks that we added via the switch stack template here, so we have check Cisco stack switch status. our interface status check based off the description or name of uplink. That's been added, along with other service checks from other templates as well. If you want to see more information on that as to how these service checks were being applied, we can go ahead and click the gear icon on the top right. If I show advanced options, we can see all the templates that are being applied to this device. So we have the default template that's being applied. It's applied to all our devices. At the type level, we have Cisco switches template being applied. At the subtype level, we have switch stacks being applied. And then site, category, functional group, and device, we have nothing in there. If you're not familiar with our templating hierarchy, it kind of goes in this I've heard the term porous. It works pretty well. You can think of like a porous filter. We're filtering down from the top template as we go down to the device level. The further down you go, the more specific it gets. But templating in itself is a whole other session that could be on itself. And we can see we have our Cisco as switch device type and then the switch stack subtype. If I click on from the device administration page, if I click on service, we can see that via the padlock icons on the right-hand side, I know that these are being applied via a template. If I hover over them, I can see which template is actually applying the check. So here I can see the default template. Here I can see it's the Cisco switches template. And then down here, the stack switch status. If I hover over that, I can see that it's from the switch stacks template. So just by being able to create a dynamic device attribute, putting it in the device type polar section, creating our subtype, our grouping method, and then our template with our configuration and tying that to our grouping method, and then finally creating our auto configuration rule, we can automate this process. So when a device gets learned, if there's certain specific attributes about it, in this case here, that this device belonged into a switch stack configuration, we can apply the correct service checks or even maybe change the alert contacts in that template accordingly. Now, this doesn't have to be just for net new devices. So in this example, I showed you how to go through the process, and then I added a new device. So any device is getting auto-discovered or running through that process when it gets added. It's going to automatically get the subtype and device attribute added to it. But we can also do this in retroactively. So if I go to administration, change devices, and then rediscover devices, I'm going to just select everything here, and I'm just going to filter for my iOS switch because I already have some in place here. Select all of those, and I'm going to have them run through the auto configuration rules. So go ahead and turn that on, rediscover selected devices. So let's go in here and let's look for India-S1. There we go, if I spell that correctly. I'm going to go ahead and click on the little gauge icon here, take me to device overview dashboard. From here, I can see I got some warnings on my service checks. Loading this page here, I can see that we have our service check applied to it. So check Cisco stack switch status, check interface status on uplink, go overview, post information. We can see that our stack port status is set to 2. So you can retroactively reconfigure or automatically configure devices that are already managed as well, just by running them through the auto configuration rule set during your discovery pool. So that was my session today. So hopefully that this helps, get the creative juices flowing in your mind there, and that you're able to use this to help your day-to-day work with Netreo and your day-to-day onboarding and device management. This was a very specific use case because this came up recently. It fit a need to be able to not only determine if a switch is stack capable, but if it was actually in a stack switch configuration. So this way you can apply the proper configurations needed on a device. We really enjoyed giving you guys this presentation today. So feel free to ask any questions. I'll still be here in the chat room and enjoy watching the other sessions from other Netreons. You guys have a good one.